There once was a British sports car which cost £5,000 in the 60s and now sells for nearly £200,000. A car that could scorch from 0 to 100 miles an hour and brake to a standstill in less than 14 seconds.
The stuff of legends. A giant killer. The meanest, baddest, rudest, most evil sports car ever. The AC 7-litre Cobra.
Back in 1953, AC Cars launched their stunningly beautiful Ace. Pretty but not that powerful, it took a smooth-talking Texan called Carroll Shelby to shoehorn a series of V8 engines into the Ace, turning it into the legendary Cobra. The most outrageous of which was the 427.
But this was no hot rod built in a back alley. The early 289 Cobras, that's the ones with the 4.7-litre engine, had cart springs, Stone Age suspension. So to cope with all the power, Ford got their computers at Dearborn to design a new chassis for the 7-litre. And it had anti-dive and anti-squat characteristics and coil springs at the back. And ultimate power it was. Top speed was 165 and 60 came up in a bowel-shattering 3.8 seconds. It was the fastest car the world had ever seen.
Instantly it became known as a killer car. One Californian lost control at 100 miles an hour, his Cobra spinning no less than 10 revolutions before it went over a cliff. In 1969, a borrowed Cobra killed both its occupants by hitting a wall at 120 miles an hour, leaving skid marks 300 foot long. And one 18-year-old American plunged to his doom 200 foot down the Aspen Pass in Colorado.
There was so much power from the back wheels that you could literally rip ruts in soft tarmac. And rumour has it that when Carroll Shelby took prospective purchasers out for a test drive, he'd stick a $100 bill to the windscreen, bury the throttle, and tell his passenger he could have the bill if he could reach it. The sheer push from the G-forces meant he won every single time.
And despite officially stopping production in 1967, replica Cobras are still made here at the AC factory in Weybridge, Surrey. Traditionally hand-fettled with bodies painstakingly beaten out of aluminium. So why is this one legend that refuses to be forgotten?
It's a primeval sports car. It's one of the most blood-curdling cars that's ever been made, and I don't think anything else has ever been made like it since. It's a product of hand-built British craftsmanship. The people that buy them are true car enthusiasts.
I've always said that someone who thinks that they can tame a Cobra is an absolute fool that needs respect at all times.
The earlier Cobras, the 5-litre Cobras, you could tame. The 7-litre Cobras, you think you've tamed them, you abuse them once and they bite you back. You have it facing the other way around. You never ever tame a 450 horsepower car that weighs 1 ton.
Because the Cobra's natural habitat was the racetrack, many were written off and destroyed, and it's not unknown for the less than scrupulous to build a complete new Cobra using just an old chassis number.
Back in the days when they were raced, they were wrecked, new parts were bought, new chassis. Next week, the same car's back on the racetrack, the old tangled mass is still in the garage somewhere, titles are changed over, nobody bothered.
And I suppose a good Cobra is what, worth a 427, certainly, 150, 200 grand?
150, 200,000 pounds, so it's worthwhile people dragging the old wreck out of the garage and rebuilding it.
But I see you have this marvellous piece of history here with all the old chassis numbers.
Generally known as the Bible.
The Bible. And this is the definitive guide to Cobra chassis numbers.
This is the records of AC cars. AC cars have recorded every single car they've made back to 1931.
So let's take the 47 we've got here today, which is CSX 3167. Let's find out.
Oh, here we have it here. 3166, 3167. It was produced by AC Cars on the 18th of the 8th, 1965. It was painted red with a black interior. There's your chassis number, and it was sent to Carroll Shelby in Los Angeles on the SS Risanja.
And here is chassis CSX 3167. Now, this is no ordinary Cobra. This is the actual car as tested by John Bolster, the motoring journalist for the magazine Autosport, back in 1967, where he recorded such Olympian performance times that it made the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest accelerating production car in the world. And it's no wonder when you look at this, the mother of all engines. Now, here it is. A 427 cubic inch 7-litre Ford engine out of the Galaxy 500. Ford built this engine to go NASCAR racing, and it's got a cast iron block, alloy heads, solid lifters, and a double pumper Holley carburettor, pushing out 480 horses.
The 427 Cobra was swift enough to make even its fastest rivals look like they were going backwards, but not fast enough for Ford, who had bankrolled the Cobra project. Shelby and Ford wanted a car to win at Le Mans, and that meant doing 200 miles an hour, which even the Cobra couldn't do. So in 1966, Ford pulled out, and all in all, only 310 7-litres were made, instantly becoming collector's items.
So does the Cobra really deserve its reputation as the most dangerous car ever? Yes and no. Around town, it's a sleepy, grouchy old car. But once you press that pedal, its character changes into something that should be fired from a rocket silo. There is this indescribable wall of power, and that's what can get you into trouble. The Cobra will lose traction at any speed, in any gear, and on any surface. And when it does, you better hope there's nothing solid in the way, because you'll be spinning faster than Torville and Dean.
So there it is.
An ambition fulfilled, a childhood dream realized. I have driven King Cobra. I might not have tamed it, but at least I've lived to tell the tale.
A pair of Porsche RSKs would set you back a cool $500,000. But pals Peter Truelock and Roger England, who live in the same village, have a couple of GP Spider kit cars, and they only cost $6,000 each. Indistinguishable from the real thing, they'll claim 60 in 6 seconds, despite their humble Beetle background. This fake game sure looks like fun.
Love is reaching
And if budget and fun are on opposing scales, then Alan Phipps's Bullet could be just the one for you. It could be an Aston Martin Vantage, the plaything of a millionaire. But underneath that svelte body lurks a Ford Capri. Alan spent $3,000 on a car that's easy to build, and he claims it's changed his life. It even gets him special treatment on the road.
It's such an eerie feeling.
But would he do it again? Does he like being a pretender? Was it worth it?
Yes. All right, I admit, it looks like it could be fun. But of course, how much fun you're having depends on how much you can afford. It's all about cash. And for £10,000, you could have one of these. What it is a Pontiac Fiero with a mid-mounted 2.8-litre V6 engine. But with some bolt-on fins, an eyeball-popping paint job, and if you only ever look at it through the bottom of a beer glass, it's a Ferrari Testarossa. All right, so the real thing is about 2 yards wider. But hey, for 10 grand, you couldn't get the mud flaps on a genuine Testarossa. This very car was built for Sylvester Stallone's stunt double. A replica supercar for a replica superstar. Quite fitting, really. However, if you like your action heroes tall, dark and capable of joined-up writing, then how about a Ferrari 308, just like Magnum PI? This one boasts a leather-lined cabin, air conditioning and lots of those little details that make a Ferrari special. Apart from the motor, a distinctly unspecial 2.5 litre 4-cylinder engine, and they don't make those in Maranello.
Sometimes driving this car and using it can be a little bit of a nightmare. It's great driving down the street where no one can stop you and talk to you, but as soon as you stop, as soon as you get to that petrol station, people flock around and they're asking you about your Ferrari. How much is your Ferrari and how long you've had your Ferrari? And they say, oh, I like your Ferrari, mate, I like your Ferrari, you know, how much does it cost? And you have to tell them, no, it's not a Ferrari, it's a replica. So I put the little caps on the wheels and badges and spotlights and leather interior, a very serious sound system. I think it brightens people's lives up to see a nice car in a drab Tuesday morning. People are just totally gobsmacked and it gives you a thrill. Some people have mentioned, oh, you're just being a fake, you're just being a pose and all this. But at the end of the day, it's all good fun, it's not too expensive, and I really enjoy it. It's great. I wanted something that looked great. I drive an Escort up this road, nobody looks at me. I drive this, everybody looks, and that's what it's all about.
A real 308 will cost around 30 grand, and since Steve got his pretend one, he started building kits. But that's yesterday's news, because plans are now afoot for a more up-to-date shape, and this until now secret car will soon break cover. A projected on-the-road cost of £10,000 means lots of poles for very few pounds.
Well, let's be honest, you don't want a replica, a weedy, snivelling copycat of a car. What you want is something with a motor that registers on the Richter scale, with more rubber than a fetishist Christmas party, and with looks that will burn a hole in the back of your brain. What you want is a car that looks an awful lot like this one. You're thinking that this is the time in the item when I start blathering on about how you can't beat the real thing. Well, no, because this snake is also a fake. All done and finished on the road, a Venom can be yours for around 20 grand, which is less than a third of the price of a Dodge Viper. Ah, you're saying, but the whole point of the Dodge Viper was brute horsepower, and an underpowered replica, well, it just can't cut it. Yes, except that this Venom has got 450 horsepower.
So you get the idea. If you're going to tell porcupines about the identity of your car, then make sure that your lie is an exceedingly large one.
Come through Canada corner. Castle having passed Weeks off to take second. McDonald doesn't back off at all, shooting down the challenging carousel. Over top to be denied. He's after weeks off.
My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
I wanted a race car for the street, and I knew that there was a little niche market there. I felt there was, and I proved that, and I built it, and I didn't compromise. The timing was absolutely right for it. It went out and won the world championship, and nobody else in America built anything for 20 years.
It was a simple, if brutal, idea. Take one chaste, pretty, tweedy British sports car, ship it to America, stuff in an engine the size of a Rhino, a cast iron V8, light the blue touch paper, and stand well clear.
You know, the noise alone is worth the price of the car.
It was very much a man's car, I think. And I would also guess that it was a good girl puller as well.
Very much an aggressive looking car, which turned me on, I suppose.
Fantastic noise, you know, when you start up, and wonderful vibration when you're sitting at traffic lights, just that fantastic feeling.
My wife and I had talked about selling the house first and buying a smaller house so that we can keep the car, although we only live in an average 3-bedroom semi.
Even now, 35 years later, there's still this extraordinary enthusiasm for the mark. Sort of 17, 18-year-old kids, they know what a Cobra is and they dream about owning one.
And he's right. Even now, any schoolboy who knows his motors can recognize a Cobra at 200 yards. It may have been copied by the 100, yet it's still the stuff of dreams. The wildest car of the 60s started life not in Las Vegas, but in Thames Ditton, England.
Only to phone the police, that is my car.
AC Cars had launched their voluptuous Ace in 1954, a gentlemanly sports car for the suede shoes and gin and tonic set. But few were fooled by its beguiling lines. Under the bonnet was a modest 2-litre 6-cylinder. The Ace looked a lot better than it went.
It was a very nice-looking car. It had a relationship, really, I suppose, back to the Ferrari Barchetta, and it was based on that. So it was right up to date. Well, it had to do just over 100 miles an hour to be in with a throw. If a car was capable of 100 plus, then they were considered to be fast cars.
But the Ace never made much money for AC. The family firm survived on government contracts for fiberglass invalid carriages. Sports cars were just a diverting sideline. By 1960, though, the Ace was running out of power. AC had tried their own engine, then one made by Bristol Cars. But it was a Ford Zephyr 2.5 straight-six, tuned by Ken Rudd, that proved the Ace was capable of greater things. Then along came a tall Texan with a much bigger idea.
I guess fast cars have always been an important part of my life. I started driving them on dirt tracks down in Texas. And after a while, I worked my way up to sport car driving. That was it for me. The sport car circuits, with their constantly changing conditions, offered the challenge, the kicks I was after. Finally, the big win, Le Mans, 1959. And boy, I was sitting on top of the world. Shortly after that, I became a retired race driver. About all I had was an idea. You might even call it a dream.
Because all I wanted to do was build a car that blew off the Corvettes, racing-wise. I never dreamed of taking that little old chassis and going over and racing against Ferrari.
So Shelby went cap in hand to Ford. He knew that Uncle Henry only had one car with any sporting pretensions, and that was the Lounge Lizard Thunderbird, which was all show and no go. General Motors' Chevy Corvette was king of the street, but a partnership was about to be forged that would give the Vette the fright of its life.
Then Ford came along with this small V8, And I thought, boy, that'll drop right in that AC chassis. I went into Icoca and told him I needed $25,000 and I could build a car that would beat the Corvettes on the racetrack and give Ford an image. And he told him to give me the $25,000 before I bit somebody.
So Ford supplied an engine on tick, which was shipped to AC cars in the winter of '61. It fitted perfectly.
Of course, after we got it over here and started testing it for racing, we found out that we had to re-engineer it all over again. Everything broke on it after we put 375 400 horsepower in it.
AC then beefed up the chassis, dropped in an E-type diff, stiffened the springs, added front and rear roll bars and topped it off with Girling disc brakes. The still engineless Ace was then shipped to Shelby's factory in LA, where the Ford Fairlane V8 was shoehorned in. All that was needed now was a name.
It came to me one night. I think I was laying in bed. It makes a good story, but I just thought of it one time. You see, I never worry about the name of a car, because a car makes a name. If a car's no good, then it's no matter what you call it.
From the pure silhouette of the original Ace evolved the first of the V8 Cobras, the 289.
There isn't another car in the world that feels like a Cobra. It's just all so raw, so powerful. You have to fight with it, battle with it to keep it in a straight line. Treat it with too much confidence, get cocky for a single moment, and it will simply kill you, stone dead. But the most amazing thing is this noise. It's like a moose with a bad cough. It's like, well, it's better than Beethoven.
This is CSX 2000, the first Cobra built by AC Cars in the latter part of '61. We got it in January of '62. This has a 260-inch engine. We later went to the 289. It's had 8 or 10 paint jobs because we only had one car and about 10 magazines that wanted to do articles on the car in the beginning, and we didn't have but one car and didn't want them to know that. It's absolutely original. This is my pride and joy. This is the one car that I'll always keep. Nobody will ever get this, in spite of being offered some silly prices for it.
And that same car, tested by all those motoring magazines, caused an absolute sensation. Journalists vied with each other to record ever higher speeds.
That's the sound of the quickest production sports car in the world today, the Cobra.
It's like magical figures all those years ago was the 0 to 60 time. What will it do, 0 to 60? If you looked at those performance figures in the road test, that acceleration graph was straight up, unlike most cars, which are sort of 40, 45 degrees.
No trouble. And now Miles has begun to establish his lead.
On its first outing at the Riverside Raceway in California, everybody could see the Cobra meant business. As it wiped the floor with Corvettes, E-Types and Aston Martins, the world beat a path to Shelby's door. Advertising was minimal. This was a car that sold itself.
We didn't have to, because it was so superior to the Corvette performance-wise, and the Ferraris as far as that goes, that the Buff magazines all put it on the cover, and we sold the first 100. Then we decided, ooh, boy, we sold that, let's go for 500.
I've always thought that racing does sell motor cars. I'm quite confident of that. Certainly sell Cobras.
The Cobra may have been born in suburban Surrey, but California was its natural habitat. The Americans bought them by the hundred. But here in Blighty, only 44 right-hand drive 289 cars were ever sold. The reason? Well, A, we had the E-Type, which was slightly cheaper, and B, it scared us silly.
We were all into MGAs and Triumphs and what have you, and the Cobra was an expensive motor car when it was new. I mean, it's £2,500, and we had sort of £500 each to spend on our toys, so it was just a dream.
I had this fantasy, I suppose, for a Cobra back in the very early 60s, I think, when I was a child, and I just read about these two Cobras, and the only place I could test them was on the M1. I suppose the fantasy started from there.
And it was the M1 that put the Cobra in the history books forever. Early one June morning in 1964, a special lightweight coupe destined for Le Mans was being tested by racing driver Jack Sears on a then unrestricted motorway. Journalists found out that Sears had clocked over 180 miles an hour and the game was up. There was a national outcry. Questions were asked in the House.
Oh, I think some people who remember this feel that that might be one of the reasons we have a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit. I'm sure it would have arrived anyway, but only last year, going over to Europe in my AC, I was pulled in at the customs and was accused of being responsible for this speed limit that we all now have to live with. And I was rather amazed some 30 years later that that was still an issue for certain individuals.
And then there was this, the 427, the biggest, baddest mother of them all. Just listen to the numbers, 7,000 cc, 425 horsepower, 165 miles an hour maximum speed. Shelby built this to take on the Ferraris at Le Mans, but what he didn't realize was he was building the most outrageous motoring legend of all time. And it was this actual car that made the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest accelerating production car in the world. It would hit 60 in a terrifying 4.2 seconds, and then accelerate from 0 to 100 and then back to 0 in just under 14. No wonder they called it a killer car.
And a 7-litre was lethal. In 67, an 18-year-old and his passenger were killed in the Aspen Pass. In 69, one went out of control and hit a concrete wall, killing both occupants and leaving skid marks 300 feet long.
The car was always a problem. Like that, the astronauts all used to come out here and they'd borrow them and they'd wreck one or two every weekend, it seemed like.
But the Cobra had done its job, and Ford and Shelby moved on to the more profitable Shelby Mustang 350.
By 1968, the march of legislation had rendered King Cobra an environmental and safety Armageddon. No car was more politically incorrect than this one. Today, this 427 might be worth, what, £200,000? But back then you could not give them away. Sales just evaporated. They were a legend that nobody wanted anymore.
But time can move mountains. And during the 80s, fueled by the supercar boom, AC Autocraft of Brooklands in Surrey produced a brand new Cobra, the Mark IV, with a Mustang engine and gearbox. And with a change in company ownership, the Mark IV has now become the AC Superblower. Only Carroll Shelby has the exclusive right to use the Cobra name. While lesser men draw their pensions, Carroll Shelby drives on. Even with a heart and kidney transplant behind him, he's back on track.
I missed building them after a couple of years, but there was no way that you could build anything that really made any sense unless, and that's where all these replicators for Cobras came from. But I'm building Cobras, and people had rather buy a Cobra from Carroll Shelby with a CSX serial number than they had these replicators. To have a real Cobra, you got to have a CSX serial number. Otherwise, you got a phony.
With genuine 60s cars now beyond purchase, the Cobra has become one of the most copied shapes in the world. But for some, a Cobra with an authentic AC pedigree is worth every sacrifice.
People tell me that I'm not your typical Cobra owner. I suppose it's a rich man's toy, which I'm certainly not. I'm just what I would consider working class, you know. I go to work in the mornings, I'm a decorator by trade. Well, I suppose I don't smoke and I don't drink, and whereas my friends just turn to drink or smoke whenever they get a bit stressed up, I just turn the key of the car and forget all my troubles, really. When we bought this particular Cobra, I didn't realise what it would cost to run as far as economy is concerned, and obviously being mortgaged up to the hill, I'd bought the car and didn't even have the money for the petrol thereafter. One small story is the fact that if I haven't got the petrol money, I do borrow money off of the kids, and I'm nothing to be proud of as such, but I think only a car enthusiast would probably appreciate this. And I'll borrow a fiver off of the kids, drive up to the petrol station, put a fiver's worth of petrol in, come back home, and then the next time I get the car out again, I'll do exactly the same. And sometimes there's been absolutely no food in the fridge for 7 weeks. But we still managed to get by. Is my wife behind me with this one? She was to begin with. You know, I think it's wearing off a bit now. I can remember we were driving along once and we hadn't said anything for about half an hour. She leant across and she shouted 3 words in my ear, which, quite frankly, it was quite nice to hear. And they were, "Isn't it loud?" Everybody tends to think that it's, you know, "I love you," but it wasn't. It was, "Isn't it loud?"
It's hard to believe it now, but there was a time in the mid-70s when the Cobra was just another second-hand car. You used to see them in frowsy showrooms on the Finchley Road. I even contemplated buying one once. It was one of those, a 289 for £2,000, or an XJ6. What did I do? I buy the Jag, which is now long since rusted away, and the Cobra, that's worth £80,000. Not one of my best decisions.
But the stars are burning bright, like some mystery.
I know it was a bunch of Englishmen, a bunch of Americans that got together and made it happen. It's nice to look back on